Hi, I'm Greg.
And I'm Leanne.
Welcome to the Empowered Poly Podcast, where we give you the tools to help you feel more empowered
in your polyamorous and consensually non-monogamous relationships
by sharing what we've learned as relationship coaches and as individuals.
Empowered Poly is LGBTQ2IA+, alternative lifestyle, and kink-friendly.
Thank you for joining us,
and enjoy the show.
Welcome to episode 42. Today, we have the pleasure of having our guest, Lola Phoenix. Lola is an American-born writer living in Stockholm. Lola is the author of The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-monogamy, the Non-monogamy Journal, and you have a new book coming out this August called Supporting Someone Polyamorous. You also have a weekly advice column and podcast called Non-monogamy Help. And you're also on Instagram under that same handle. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So when you're not writing books, it looks like you spend a lot of time in the gym taking walks in nature. You taking walks in nature, or baking new treats.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. So welcome, Lola.
Thank you.
Before we begin, just so that our audience knows, what are your preferred pronouns?
So I use they or she.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay. So I guess you want to jump in?
I'll jump in. Yes,
Yeah,
I'm so excited to meet you, and I'm a big fan of your books. We have them here in our office. Is that backwards? Does that look backwards? No. Okay, it looks backwards to me.
It looks backwards to you, but not to us. Yeah.
Okay.
So in your book, The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-monogamy, which is the one that we're going to focus on today, you mentioned the idea of an anchor as a grounding tool for navigating non-monogamy. Can you explain what that means, and how does it help anxious individuals feel more secure?
Yeah. So I think in general, I feel like anxiety is really common for most people. And I think that actually it makes perfect sense for people to be anxious. So even if they don't necessarily see themselves as an anxious person, whenever you're doing a new relationship style that, you don't have a cultural script for, that you've never seen, like probably haven't, most of us haven't seen it growing up, you're going to have a lot of anxiety. I want people to, rather than think about non-monogamy from the standpoint of trying to save a relationship, to think about it in terms of their own personal experience. And that can be really hard. I think that there are a lot of people who come to non-monogamy, they don't tend to find it when they're exploring in their teen years. Sometimes they're already in a relationship. Realistically, I think that's where a lot of people are. They're kind of opening up a monogamous relationship. And I think that it's very easy in some ways, not easy as an experience, but it's very easy to agree to non-monogamy to save that relationship and to keep that relationship. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad motivation, but I do think that you really should think about what personal investment you have in non-monogamy. And I don't think that this has to be that, I want to date other people. Like, you may not be that interested in dating, and that's fine, but maybe you enjoy spending time on your own. Maybe you have a really interesting hobby that you'd like to develop more time for. Maybe you want to have more friendships or even, have family that you take care of. Like, there's all kinds of things that could be a personal motivator for being interested in non-monogamy or being able to, want to be curious to explore it. And I think that that's really important, because I think that when you're dealing with a lot of the emotions that are going to come up, that I think is perfectly normal to come up, I think that having that reason to go, okay, there's a reason I chose this. There's a reason for me. There's, I'm not just doing this for the sake of somebody else. I think that that becomes really important. And I think that especially if you're starting from the standpoint of being in a relationship and opening that relationship up, if you choose to open, or if you choose to try polyamory for the sake of saving that relationship, it doesn't really work, because that relationship is not really the same. It's kind of like trying to, like, it works for some people, but it's like going long distance to save an in-person relationship. Some people can do long distance, some people can't, but a long distance relationship is different to an in-person relationship. It's not better or worse, and for some people it doesn't work as well, but you can't necessarily replace them, one for the other. And it's the same when you open your relationship. It fundamentally changes the basis of the relationship. So if you're trying to hold on to that idea of like, we're saving the relationship, it doesn't work. And I think it makes it a lot more hard to cope with. So I tell people to try and think about an anchor, think about a personal reason that they may be invested in it. Doesn't have to be super deep, doesn't have to involve even wanting to date other people, but it has to be something, because I think definitely when those emotions come up, I think you kind of have to remember, oh, this is why I'm trying this. Like there's a reason for going through all of this. And I think if you really struggle to find a personal reason, I do think sometimes that can be an indication that, are you just trying this to save that relationship? And I don't think that's always a bad thing, but I think being realistic about that is a way for you to be able to step out of that situation if you decide that it's not for you. Like the more honest you are with yourself, and the more you can say, okay, I am just trying this because I don't want to lose this person. Let's see how it goes. It's easier for you to then step out of it, rather than sort of trying to lie to yourself in a way. So I came up with that concept because I just felt like people were saying yes, not necessarily under duress, but for a reason that wasn't going to serve them later on.
From that personal perspective. Yeah, I really resonate with that. Holy smokes.
It's a quite a comprehensive answer. Thank you.
So in my experience, I came into polyamory quite young, made tons of mistakes, left, came back, left, came back. Coming back into this relationship with Greg, I was I think initially sort of framing it for myself as, I'm doing this because I fell in love with someone who's polyamorous.
Mm-hmm.
And then I looked back and I was like, wait a minute. I actually have polyamorous experiences independent of this relationship. I've experienced many times in my life since I was very young, having feelings for more than one person at a time. And the struggle with that and all of those things. But the thing is that once I was able to kind of embrace that, that became my anchor point, as you would call it, right? My motivator. This isn't just for this relationship. It is also personal.
Yeah.
Right. And for some people, it might even just be that idea of, embracing the concepts, not necessarily the practice. I love that you say that it doesn't even have to have anything to do with dating, right? Your reasons for being in this relationship. Yeah.
No, because like my personal anchor is like, I'm not the kind of person who, and there are a lot of polyamorous people like this, which is fine, but I'm not the kind of person who generally is like, I just flirt with everybody. I love dating. I love getting to know people. Like I'm an introvert. I don't talk to anybody. Like, so for me, and I'm very rarely attracted to people. Like I don't get attracted to people very often. And that's honestly my biggest anchor, because I'm like, if I feel excited about somebody, I want to have the freedom to pursue it. I say like in every 18 years precisely, when the planets align ever so nicely, like I want to be able to try it, because it's a rare experience and I don't want to lose out on that. And even if it is very rare, that's still something that I go, actually, that has a huge value to me. And so even if things are difficult, I still want that regardless.
Yeah, I'm similar to that too, because one of the reasons that I identify as poly, and the reason that it's such an integral part of who I am in my existence, is because of that same reason. I don't want I don't want some arbitrary sort of societal rules limiting the way that I can relate to people, right? And that even works within the construct of a specific relationship. Maybe it's a romantic relationship but not a sexual one. Maybe it's a platonic relationship with a sexual component to it, right? All of these different variables play a role. And so your anchor concept is similar to what I call, what's your why? Like, why are you polyamorous? Why are you non-monogamous? What is the driving motivator? What is your personal motivator? And it's something that we talk with our clients about a lot, especially clients that are new to it, clients that have um, been brought into it because their partner, has said, "Hey, I think I'm this way." Right? Again, it's very fundamental to moving forward and taking responsibility for your role in creating and cultivating a healthy relationship, and not just being like, "Well, my partner is this way, so I have to be this way too," because that leads to resentment and all sorts of bullshit that comes up that just doesn't serve anybody.
No.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
I love that.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries.
So, yeah, so I'm going to go on to another question here. You encourage readers to reflect on their personal motivations for choosing
Mhm.
non-monogamy. What are some of the ways people can dig deeper into their reasons to make sure that they're aligning with what truly works for them?
So I think that this is a really challenging thing, right? Because there's so many aspects of trying non-monogamy that make this really, really difficult. Like for one, I think, like I said, you don't have a cultural script for this. So you are trying something new, which makes it normal to feel a huge amount of anxiety. We're social creatures. We want to fit into some type of social community, some type of atmosphere, and we're going to be motivated to avoid things which we think are going to cause us harm. And so that is a huge thing. I think when you do get involved in a polyamory community, if you do find it, there are all kinds of social pressures within that community to be good at polyamory. You know, there's an idea that a lot of polyamorous people have that I try really hard not to encourage, which is like the idea that monogamy is kind of less than, or like you can't
Mm.
handle polyamory. So then you have that pressure on top of you to like prove that you're good at polyamory. And then as well, like you just don't want to lose your relationship. Understandably, you don't want to lose that. And I think it can be really, really hard within that context to find that personal motivator. But I think it's just as important, even if you're not considering polyamory, to ask, why are you monogamous? And that may be a good starting point to figure out like where you want to go. What does your ideal life look like? What does your best life look like? Why does it look that way? I think that you can find a personal motivator to try and be interested in polyamory if you just think about like what would be your personal motivator to be monogamous. Because the thing that I always encourage people to remember is that monogamy feels safer because it has that cultural kind of backing behind it, but it's not necessarily safer. There's no guarantee just by the agreement of monogamy that your partner's going to stay with you. Like when I was doing research, like I was interested in getting a breast reduction, and I was doing all this research about like mastectomies and things like that. And I found so many terrible, horrible stories about women who had gotten breast cancer and needed double mastectomies, and would literally, like, one had like her husband of like 20 years drove her to the hospital to get her double mastectomy, drove home, packed, and left.
Oh,
And like
shit.
obviously that's an extreme example, right? Like that doesn't happen every day. But I'm saying, what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily safer. It's not necessarily going to guarantee you anything. If it's something you want to practice because you're actively choosing it, then that's fine. But I think that if you start to pick apart these things, like, okay, why am I choosing monogamy? If I'm not choosing polyamory, why are you choosing monogamy? Are there
Mhm.
reasons behind it? There are some people who, you know, I always encourage people as well to think about time. And one of the things that I kind of preempt people with is like, if you're monogamous and you're trying to figure out, okay, am I interested in polyamory? Is this something I want to try? Could you be monogamous to a person who has a time intensive career, or
Mm.
has a time intensive hobby, doesn't spend a lot of time at home? Because regardless of what kind of polyamory you practice or you're interested in, you do get less time with one person than you would typically get within monogamy. And for some people, that's not something they want. And that's fine. Like it may not even be about jealousy or about seeing their partner with thinking about their partner being with someone else. It may be just that time aspect, that lifestyle aspect. Like, and I always say it's like living in the city or living in the country. Like there are different ways to live, there are different aspects of life. Neither one is necessarily better than the other. You know, they have different cultural contexts and different challenges. But I think it's about actively choosing the life that you want as best you can. Understandably, there are aspects of that that are out of our control, but I think if you're trying to find your reason for trying polyamory, think about what reason you have to stick with monogamy. Like, is there a reason? Are you picking it because you're actively making a decision about your life, or are you picking it because it's what's been presented to you and you're not really thinking about it? I think that that can be a good start. But I think I always tell people, like, I can't tell them if they're polyamorous. Like I can't tell them. That is something that they have to go on a personal journey and explore and figure out themselves. And I would encourage people to not be afraid if they get it wrong. Like it's fine. It's sort of the same sort of thing about like people being worried about their sexuality being a phase. It's like, and what if it is? What if it's a phase?
Mm.
Like what's the end of,
Mhm.
like, is it really the end of the world if you had a bit of a time where you tried something and okay, it wasn't for you? Like is that really so terrible? Like see it if it will. You know, it's hard to say that with such an ease when you're dealing with like the potential of losing a relationship. Like that is hard. But, you know, if you can approach it with a standpoint of, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I'm just going to see if this works for me. I'm going to explore with myself and figure out myself if this, you know, what life is for me, not just if polyamory is for me, what life is for you. Then I think that can be a good way to start to figure that out and to piece that together, rather than just kind of going with any situation, monogamous or polyamorous, just because you're kind of being compelled.
Mhm.
Yes. And
Great.
can I
Yeah.
just add that I think the non-monogamy journal would be a really great way to kind of dig deeper. What you have in here is, it says on the front 90 plus scenarios and questions. So with the scenarios, you give a situation and then ask a question. And the questions are, you know, more about things to consider that you can journal
Mhm.
on. And I think these are incredibly helpful prompts that would really guide someone through the process of figuring that out. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, it's a really helpful workbook. Thank you for
Mhm.
putting that together and offering it to the world.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question for you
Mhm.
about that. So basically, what I'm hearing you say is that you're inviting people to get curious,
Mhm.
essentially, right? Experience, explore, and experiment, right? You know,
Yeah.
and don't hold yourself to a steadfast rule that this has to work out a certain way.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Okay. My curiosity comes from so much of the work that Leanne and I do, and I'm assuming so much of the work and the research that you've done is centered around opening up an existing relationship.
Mhm.
What advice? And I know I'm going a little off the script here with the questions, but what advice would you give to somebody who's solo poly, who's not in an active relationship or is in an active relationship, but wants to identify as solo because that does happen as well, right?
Yeah.
So what advice
Absolutely.
would you give to them?
That is actually my situation. Like I wasn't in a relationship. I came across polyamory through I basically I get like really big special interests in things and I research them and I'm really intense about them. And my special interest was sexual health for a long time. And I was really active in sexual health advice communities and things like that, which led to understanding more about swinging, understanding more about polyamory. And it became something that I was like, oh, I think that this is definitely something that I would like to do. And it kind of started from a standpoint of being interested in and having new sexual experiences because I came out as bi and I hadn't had a girlfriend. And then also it started kind of like merged onto like, okay, maybe I can try this. I think for people who are not in an existing relationship and are wanting to try polyamory, one thing that I would definitely really encourage them to consider is be very not skeptical, but like be very take it with a grain of salt when you get involved with communities. Because I think the biggest mistake that I've made, and I've written like this is kind of like the basis for my anxious guide and for like my 101 article that I've written, is I assumed that if I did all the reading and if I got involved in these communities and I looked up to people who I saw as experts because they were dating lots of people, that I would be okay. Right. And that
Mm.
nothing bad would happen. I wouldn't make any mistakes. Everything would be fine. And I actually refer to it now as like the polyamory PhD. I feel like this is the
Mhm.
advice that is given to everybody is like, read these books. And I'm not saying don't read books. I'm an author. That would be silly. But it's like, I'm not, but the advice is always like read these books, take 6 months and wait, and then maybe you'll be ready. And I think that sets people up, and this idea that like there's an echelon, there's a right way to do polyamory, even though we say there's no one right way. I do feel like there is an idea of what the ideal is, right? It's to be unbothered. It's to be,
Mhm.
you have compersion for everyone, you get along with all your metamors, you don't experience any negative feelings. Like that is an ideal that we're aiming for, even if we're not going to say it. And I think that it can be very easy, especially if you're not in any relationship, to kind of square yourself off and go, if I do all the reading and if I do all this, I will be set and I won't have any issues. And I think that be wary of that. Like I'm not
Mhm.
saying don't do the reading. I'm saying just be aware that when you're reading something and when you're putting into practice, it's two different things. And you would never expect yourself, if you were like, reading about how to play an instrument, you would never ever expect that after 6 months of reading about how, that you would pick up an instrument and become a virtuoso. But yet we expect that a little bit of ourselves when it comes to polyamory. Like we think, oh, I'm going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. And it's not always. And it's not necessarily because you failed. It's not because you're not prepared. It's not because you can't hack it. It's just, that's how it is. And I think the other thing I would definitely advise is, especially if you're new to something, I think it can be quite easy to let things slide and to not assert your own boundaries. I get questions from people all the time, like, is this normal? Is this, you don't have a cultural script. So it's very, very easy. My first technical experience of polyamory, someone used me to cheat. And there were situations where I could have, like, I knew that they were dating somebody else. It's so silly when I look back on it now. So I'd never tolerate it now. But like literally they were like, this is a person I'm dating. I was like, oh, I'll add them and we'll have a chat. And they were like, no. And I was like, why not? And they were like, oh, I was about to move countries. And their argument was, I'd prefer if you met in person. And like, I was like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. But like now I wouldn't have even have asked that. I would have just added the person. So like, stuff like that, I think if you feel something's not right, it's okay to say that. And, do check in. Like if you have to check in with somebody and say, is this normal? That's okay too. Because it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to kind of, when you're new to something, to kind of put in those boundaries right away, because you don't quite have your footing and you're new to it. Yeah, those are like the main things that I think for people not opening a relationship that they kind of need to be aware of.
Right. Yeah, we get a lot of questions about, is this reasonable? Is this something that I should be doing? Am I crazy? Am I the asshole? That's a big one, right? Am I the asshole for thinking this way, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And in many cases, you're not. They're not asshole. It's just, it's the gut guiding them, and it's like, no, your partner is actually being a jerk, or your partner is actually lying or cheating or whatever, right? Or not being as transparent as you feel they need to be, right? And that's the key, as you feel they need to be, right? So yeah, so thank you. Thanks for that.
I'm just going to follow up with that and challenge something that you said, if that's okay, because we like that in this room.
Yeah, we challenge. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you said I would just go ahead and add that person, for us, we practice parallel poly with a dash of garden party, where we socialize with our metas for special occasions. So parallel poly is very separate. I don't interact with my meta really. And if someone has that kind of an agreement in place, you're going ahead and adding them would be crossing that boundary for them, right? And obviously you can make the request, you can offer it to them, and they can say no, right? I think just that little caveat in there, because we want to respect the other person's consent too in this, and sometimes they don't want contact, and that's okay.
Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I definitely was like more parallel in the, like I describe myself more as solo now, but like it's interesting because of that experience. I kind of went the other way for a while, and I was like, I have to meet all of my metamors. I won't ever tolerate being cheated on. And then I put myself in a situation, it was really bad, where I forced myself to be friends with my metamors, and it was not nice. It was horrible for me. And this is actually one of the reasons why I have like, I really encourage people, like, you really don't have to, like, you do not have to meet. It's not don't ask, don't tell, just because you don't talk to them. It's really not. Those are two different things. So yeah, I totally understand. I think now I would probably like, if that person, if we had an understanding of like, oh, okay, I would probably just be like, well, you don't have to tell me this other person. Like, you don't have to tell me more about them. Like, I know that you're dating other people. I've agreed to this. Like, that's fine. But yeah, I totally get what you mean. Like, definitely you don't have to go ahead and add that person. They may not want, not want to interact with you, and it may not have anything to do with not having a problem with you. It's just how they prefer to do things. But yeah, I don't force yourself to be friends with someone that you're not friends with in any context, because it's not fun.
In any context.
And I think, just to follow up on that too, I think it's also important that if that's something that you feel that you need, so if you need to double check to make sure, especially, and let's face it, I mean, it is more gender skewed towards men. So, women do often, or female identifying folk do often feel the need to have some sort of checks and balances system in place. And part of that is, hey, can I check with your partner just to make sure that you're on the up and up, right?
Mhm.
I don't have to deal with that anymore, but there was a point in my poly journey over the last 20 some years where I did have to deal with
Mhm.
that. I don't, if that's not the right phrase, but you know what I mean.
Manage it.
Where I chose to deal with that because I
Mhm.
wasn't out as publicly as I am now. Right now, I don't have to deal
Mhm.
with it at all. I'm like, well, you want to know if my wife knows about it? Sure. Just watch
Yeah.
any of the 40 episodes of the podcast that we have on the subject, or, right. So it's not really an issue. But for those that it is, I would
Mhm.
encourage you to make the request. Hey, is this something that I can just at least, have a brief, text chat with them or a brief video call with them? If they say no, well, then you've got some decisions to make about whether or not
Yeah.
that's in alignment with how you want to move through relationships. Right. And
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
okay too. If that's not something
Mhm.
you're comfortable with, that's okay. Then you can say, no,
Mhm.
then I'm not interested in this because of X, Y, and Z, or you don't really have to give a reason at all.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's one of those ways that we can reduce our anxiety around it, right? Is to vet early, advocate early for what we need, be clear, and
Mhm.
then see if we're in alignment.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So much of the work that we do is just about validating people's need to do all the checks and the balances. Like, am I being unreasonable because I want to know this or because I need to know this? No, your desire to know this is not unreasonable, nor is their desire not to share that with you unreasonable, right? The question becomes whether or not you can live with that and take responsibility
Mhm.
for that relationship and your role in it moving forward without that information.
Exactly. And if like one thing I always encourage people to think about is I do feel like I'm always giving people permission to have feelings. Like it's yes, it's fine for you to
Oh
have
my
feelings.
God.
It's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
The thing I always ask them is like, are you taking this action to try and stop yourself from having feelings? Or are
Mm-hmm.
you taking this action because it's actually going to result in something productive? Because I do
Love
feel
that.
like that is another thing that so many people do. Like they make rules or they try to do things to stop feeling the feeling
Mm-hmm.
rather than to actually fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Yeah, that's a
mhm.
great point. I like that question. Are you doing this to stop the feeling? Because here's
Mhm.
here's a little life hack, folks. It's not gonna stop.
No.
It's gonna
Yeah.
come back. Even if it stops momentarily, even if you do the thing that you think is gonna stop the feeling will eventually come back if you don't address the wound that's underneath. Just a little life hack
Exactly.
from your old Uncle Greg here. So the reality is that I love that too, because you're working with actionable results, right? And you're
Mhm.
not you're not you're not dismissing the feeling behind it, right?
Yeah.
Because so many people are like, I don't want to feel this way.
Mhm.
Well, you do feel this way, so you can not want to feel this way all you want, but you still are going to feel this way because you're
Exactly.
feeling this way right now. So anyway.
Mhm. That's the other game people should play when they listen to our podcast is how many times do we say feel?
Feel. Yeah. Yeah, my
Um,
clients love that question. How do you feel? Oh, good. Nope, that's not a feeling. Keep going.
yeah, so the next question is you emphasize self-compassion as an element in managing anxiety. What are some practical ways people can be kinder to themselves? I mean, we've already kind of touched on a couple, sort of that clarity advocacy piece and all of that, but let's maybe get into what else can they do?
So I think that one of the problems that I had very early on with like my anxiety and with typical polyamory advice that I heard at the time, I think things are getting better.
Mm.
But the advice I heard at the time is like things like if you feel like your partner, if you're scared that your partner is going to leave you or that they don't like you as much as somebody else, just remember that you're great and you're awesome and you're special. And that, then you'll feel better. And I was like, okay, I'm fighting like a constant anxiety going on in my brain. Like now I'm much better than I was, but that type of thought process is not what's going on up here. And to jump from, I think it's very similar to body positivity in a way, to jump from being very negative to being I'm the best sexiest person alive. Like it doesn't work. It's not it like a stepping stone doesn't work. So one thing that I think really really helped me in terms of my anxiety, like not just with polyamory, but overall, is that I understood like my nervous system was a big thing. I think that that is a good gateway to self-compassion, because you start to understand that your reactions to things are not like, you know, you have a certain amount of control of your behaviors and how you adapt to it, but like your initial reaction is not always something that is immediately within your control. It has a lot to do with how you survived in the past. And that was a really big game changer for me, because I initially saw my anxiety as like, I'm Sisyphus, I'm pushing this boulder up a hill. Every time I have a panic attack, the boulder falls back down again. I've failed, I've lost control, self-punishment, self-attack, blah, blah, blah. And then I started to shift into this kind of median area where my anxiety was instead like a demon that was possessing me, right? And in some ways that was better, because it's like, okay, I experienced this, I have this is going to happen. It isn't a failure on my part. It's just something I'm experiencing. And that in a way was better, because then I wasn't punishing myself for having it anymore. But in a way, it wasn't better. I do think that there is sometimes when you're, you know, I'm not a trauma expert, but I think in healing from trauma, I think first you have to kind of accept that, yes, I've been through this. And sometimes some people don't even get to that point, right? They're just like, I'm fine. Everything that happened to me just happened. It is what it is. And I'm okay. And, you know, you have to accept that it's happened. And then I think you do have to kind of be in a little bit of a state of, you know, I, not to call it victimhood, but to recognize yourself as having been victimized by this experience. Like, is this happened to me? I have had this experience. I feel, you know, it feels out of control. But then for me, what actually helped with the anxiety, because if it's, you know, this demon that's attacking me, I can't control it. I can, like, I'm just possessed, and that's it, the end. Unless I find an exorcist, there's no way out of it, right? I can't control that. But then when I actually started learning more about the nervous system, and I started learning, okay, this is a response, this is a survival response, that like demon turns into little me. That's me trying to protect myself, not having the skills or the ability to protect myself. That is, you know, and then I look at, it's almost like that like seeing yourself as a little kid and saying, okay, this is a part of me. This isn't an evil force. This isn't something I have to fight against. This is just a part of me trying to save me. And actually, I can change this. I don't need an exorcist. I just need to be the adult, and I need to comfort that kid, and I need to say, hey, it's okay that you feel this way. I got this. We got this. We can't change, you know, you can't control who falls in or out of love with you. You can't control, like, yes, you can be a jerk and you can make people not want to be around you. But to a certain extent, like, you can't control whether or not someone stays in love with you. You can't control if they find you attractive anymore. You can't control if you meet someone perfect or not. Like, there's so many things that are outside of your control, but you can control how you decide to frame it, how you just, you know, the comfort that you give yourself. You can always be there for yourself. And then when you start to build like that, that's the self-compassion. It's going, actually, I got this. And that builds the trust. Because I think when you are in that state of like, I'm possessed by something, I'm at the whimsy of the, or I'm not whimsy, but I'm at the whim of this and I can't control it. In a way, you kind of continue the victimization of yourself, right? Like, you continue, you betray yourself by choosing stuff you don't want. You can't be honest. You can't exert like your own needs and wants, because you're just always constantly like at the whim of this. And stepping into that power by understanding and seeing this as like having compassion for it is extremely helpful. And I think like it opens up so much, like not even just within polyamory, but within life and coping with things. Like I would say, like, I used to have, you know, I was never officially diagnosed, but I had constant anxiety, like panic attacks every night for a good couple of years. Just never, like, I didn't even realize I actually feel my anxiety more in my body now than I ever did before, because I'm at a calm state and then I go up. But I was in such a constant level of anxiety that, you know, it was just all the time. It was my base level state. And that has such a huge effect on all of your relationships and everything in your life. And it's kind of like that meme I refer to a couple of times, where one person's on the side of the bus that's looking at the wall and the other person's looking out the window. Like, you can move over to the window side. And part of that is like recognizing that these are things that you're doing not because you're trying to betray yourself, you're not hurting yourself, you're not your own enemy. I think that that's such a big important step for like being able to not just cope with some of the ups and downs in polyamory, but just cope with anxiety in general. I think that is, if I could have, like, I think if every person had self-compassion, it would be a massively different world. Because I think that if you can't have compassion, like you struggle to feel compassion for other people if you can't have compassion for yourself, like hugely. Like before, I remember before I went to therapy, I thought therapy was going to make me into Spock and I would like have no more emotions. Like that's what I thought. I would just like, I want to get rid of my emotions. Yay, therapy. I'm going to be emotionless. And actually what I found, like I used to be the like vice in university, I used to be part of the horror movie club, so I watched a lot of horror movies. I actually now, like, it's harder for me to watch that. You know, if anything, I'm more in touch with my feelings, and that's not a bad thing. So yeah, I think like self-compassion is such a huge thing, and it's one of the biggest steps that I made towards being able to be less anxious. And yeah, like I said, if everyone in the world was more self-compassionate, I think things would be very different.
Wow.
And I like
Thank
it
you.
much better than self-love. Self-love is this sort of huge ask, right?
Yeah.
When people hear, you know, just love yourself, it's like, I got a lot of issues with myself, so I can't do that, but I can give myself compassion. And the parts work that you just mentioned is a game changer for a lot of people too. Certainly was for me. You know, yeah, getting in touch with your inner child, your inner parts, all of them. And what's great about that is that once you realize that behind that big demon of anxiety is this little kid, it's like pulling the curtain back on Oz, you know, you go, okay, there we go. That's more manageable. And it's someone that you know because it's you. It's not this external thing that's so scary. Yeah. Exactly. Wonderful.
Yeah, if I could just nerd out for a second, because I totally nerd out on internal family systems work, as well as DBT and CBT therapeutic modalities and all of that stuff. But the IFS is internal family systems, and that's where you create this literally this family of parts within you that you know that come up. And the way that I like to express it for myself and also suggest for clients is that, you know, like that for me it's an 8-year-old boy, and that's me as as an 8-year-old, right? When I become reactive, or when what I refer to as reactive is either hyper emotional or hypo emotional, right? Hyper arousal or hypo arousal. And when I'm in either one of those states, I call it my 8-year-old driving a bus, right? He's driving the bus right now and he can't even see over the fucking steering wheel. So we got a problem, right? And so we need to deal with that problem, right? Because otherwise it's just going to be a wreck, right? And so as much as he wants to protect me, as much as he's trying to help us, he's not really capable of that. Right. And so that's when we have to step in as the adult and say, hey, we don't admonish, we don't punish. That's the word I was looking for. We just simply say, hey, you know what? Look, I appreciate you. Thank you. Right. And that's the compassion piece. That's the empathetic part of it. Thank you for trying to help and for keeping us safe. Even as I say it, I have goosebumps right now. I get goosebumps even as I say it, and I'm not currently in a reactive state. But it's just such an incredibly powerful tool, such an incredibly powerful way to reframe things. Right. You know, and you take, you know, okay, so we're going to take you out of the driver's seat and we're going to put you in the back seat with a toy because that's what you do and that's where you belong. And then I'm going to take over driving the bus, right? And to me, that's kind of the way that I manage it in my head now. And I love that idea though, and I love that you brought that up about the inner girl in your case, the inner child in your case. And yeah, so it's amazing work. But you're right, absolutely. Self-compassion, empathy, curiosity, all of these things can lead us down a road that can just open up everything. And this isn't just about non-monogamy or polyamory, right? It's about just living life and so on. So anyway, I could keep
Yeah.
going because literally I could nerd out on this shit all day.
It's hard to reparent your inner child as well if you didn't learn how to parent. Like if you're that is, I actually got into one of like my special interests or things that I was really interested in learning about was like brain-based parenting, what's kind of roughly called like gentle parenting but authoritative parenting, and like learning about how do you handle tantrums, learning about the fact that when you say don't do this to a toddler, their brain is actually learning language still, so they only hear the verb, so that's why they're not being defiant when you say don't do that and then they do it. It's actually because their brain hasn't learned what don't doing something means. So stuff like that, like even though I'm not a toddler, obviously, that really helped me to understand that little child more and to understand how to approach that, because you can approach your inner child and be like, stop doing that, like, and that doesn't work either.
No, you
Yeah.
must be compassionate. You must be understanding. And it's interesting too. The more work that I've done in this, the more I find I extend it outward to other
Exactly.
people.
Yeah.
I'm less angry. I'm less reactive when people cut me off in
100%.
traffic, for instance. I'm less I'm less reactive with challenges I might have with partners
Mm-hmm.
because I'm able to set myself in their shoes, right? Empathy, right? And be like,
Mm-hmm.
what must they be going through? How are they
Exactly.
Mm.
feeling? It doesn't forgive the actions. It doesn't
Yeah.
forgive them of the responsibility for their actions, but it certainly can go a long way to helping me stay regulated.
Yeah. And that reflects like I can have way more difficult conversations with people
Hmm.
who are ignorant as well. Like I'm not so like when I come across ignorance, I'm not so bothered by it. Like
Hmm.
genuinely am able to deal with that a lot better. So like definitely if you're a person who wants to improve the world, you want things to be better, you want to like change the world, being able to regulate yourself and not be severely caught off, put into a really emotive state by something someone says is really a critical skill that's very
Hmm.
undervalued, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Totally, 100%. And
Absolutely.
then, as far as non-monogamy and polyamory go, it can also help
Mm-hmm.
to really reaffirm the foundations in your relationship, both the existing relationships or any new relationships that come along. Because if you're leading
Mm-hmm.
from self-compassion, empathy, and curiosity, you're not in a
Mm-hmm.
space of judgment. You're not in a space of
Exactly.
condemning. You're not in a space of assumption.
Yeah. You have another question.
I do. I do. I don't think we're going to get through all these questions, but we're
I
going to
don't think we are either, but that's
try
okay.
It's
we're
all
going to
right.
try, like, you know what. Okay, so um you've spoken about some of the difficulties in finding a welcoming non-monogamous or polyamorous community, and I know that from my experience as well, there's a lot of gatekeeping that goes on in the community. There's a lot of, you're not doing it right, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
berating and assumption making and all sorts of other things. So what are some of the barriers people face, and how can they seek out supportive spaces?
So for me, I always describe polyamory communities as in the UK, there's a phrase called a postcode lottery. And that's kind of
Mhm.
basically what it means is that your access to certain services will vary depending on postcode. So like the doctor may be really, really good in this postcode, but not in the other. And you have to stay within your postcode. So it's kind of like, eh. And I do think that there are some polyamory communities, and I have heard from friends, like when I've described the experiences that I've had, they've been like, wow, my community is not like that at all. So I do think there are some communities that are genuinely good, but I think that the biggest problem that I had in communities is that I found that when there are people who are put on pedestals in those communities, like when there are big community leaders, it's very, very easy, especially as a new person coming in, to think that, oh, they have everything handled. Like they're dating everybody and everybody wants to date them. So clearly they must be really safe people to be
Mm.
around. And my experience was not the case.
Yeah.
I had, experiences where I was interested in somebody who everybody was interested in. And I found that because everybody was interested in them, no one wanted to say anything bad about them. And they were, behaviors that they had that would probably in other communities not be tolerated were very much tolerated because they were a pillar in the community. They were well known, they were well liked, and nobody really, everybody kind of wanted to get with them. So nobody was going to call it out. And
Mm.
not that I'm necessarily either in favor of like pushing people out of places, because I also don't necessarily think that's a good vibe either. The sort of idea of like, if you make a mistake or if you do something wrong, you're going to be immediately kicked out and shunned. I think there are equal problems with that, but I think you just be wary when you go into communities. Take things with a grain of salt. Don't assume that just because someone, you know, is well experienced or because they have a lot of partners that they are doing things right all the time. And it's not that you have to do everything right all the time. We all make mistakes. We're all human. But sometimes I think having that belief also reinforces the idea that you can't make a mistake. And it also makes it a lot harder when, you know, you have relationship problems. You think that you'd be able to talk with the community about it, or you'd be able to go with the community about it, but then you can't, because then it reflects poorly on you. Like, you're not able to do polyamory right, like you're getting it wrong, you've broken up. So like, is that, you know, there's a lot of that insular dynamic. And I think there's also a lot of a kind of a attitude in some communities of, you know, the idea that monogamy is less than. And I think that sometimes this comes out of a defensive reaction, right? Like, sometimes people, they get sick and tired of people going like, oh, I could never do that, I'm not, you know, like, so they just have like a defensive reaction. And I don't blame people for making lighthearted jokes, or like, you know, are the monogamous people okay? Like, I don't mind a little bit of lighthearted ribbing. That's all right. But I do think that it can get to a point where it's so negatively judged that people will stay in relationships that they don't want to be in, because they don't want to be seen as a failure, not only as a failure in their relationships, but a failure by going back to monogamy. And I've said multiple times, like on the column in the podcast, like, polyamory is not an excuse to have multiple semi-sustaining relationships until you reach a level of permissible stasis. Like, it's not, you're not kind of like piecing together a Franken relationship to make something that actually, you know, passes for something. Like, it should, every relationship should be something that you appreciate in its own way. So yeah, I think that, you know, I'm not saying your community may be great. They may be super supportive. They may, you know, you may not have those issues, but just, you know, take it with a grain of salt, see how people interact. And if your local community isn't great, there are online communities. You can make your own community. Like, there's lots of other options. So don't be discouraged, and don't think that if you don't fit in with your local community that there's something wrong with you. Because it may just be there. There's also, like, one thing that I also talk about is my own experiences of, like, I was an immigrant in the UK, and I didn't come from a very wealthy family. I came from a very poor family, and I also experienced estrangement. So I didn't have a lot of the resources that a lot of other polyamorous people had. And it was really hard sometimes to exist in a community of people who had a lot more access to a lot more resources than I did. Like, yeah, we're throwing this big play party at this mansion and this you know, place in England. Do you have like 75 quid to go and travel to this mansion? And I'm like, no. So like, that is also another thing. Like, you may experience actual barriers with other people that, you know, you may not be necessarily used to. So if you don't fit into those communities, it's not because you're not polyamorous enough or anything like that. And if anyone ever makes you feel like, you know, that you're not cut out for this, I just immediately think that's a no-go. You know,
Yeah,
like,
it's
don't
funny.
go.
It's funny you say that, because I just put a post up yesterday on my social media talking about that exact thing, about it. Nobody's going to come along and take your poly card away,
Yeah.
right? They're not. But if they try to, tell them to fuck off.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's like yeah, anyway, sorry. I want to go back to something that you said that kind of struck me. And again, yeah, it's a bit I guess I have a curiosity about it. So you said going back to monogamy. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means to you? Going back to, I found that phrasing to be interesting, going back to monogamy.
I think that if a lot of people who kind of feel that they have a long dating experience within monogamy, maybe they've been in previous very long period monogamous relationships, and so they have a history of that. It's not something that, I mean, I didn't really have very many dates, to be honest. Like, I I didn't date around monogamously a lot before I became polyamorous. So I didn't necessarily have that kind of same grounding, but I tended to notice, like, when I was giving people advice, and when, especially people who started off in a monogamous relationship and then they were opening and trying things, I tended to notice that there was an idea of like going back, of like retreating back, and that being very characteristically seen in a lot of poly circles as a failure, or as something that is safer in a way. And one of the things that I kind of always wanted people to think about is that, if you want to be monogamous, if that's actually where you want to be, that's fine. You don't have to feel any shame about it. You can maybe not describe it as going back. Maybe you describe it as, this is actually what I prefer to be. But I just want people to kind of, not see this as something that is a failure, or as something that needs to be shamed. And to see it as like, it's might be something they were like they felt like they were before, and then some people identify as being polyamorous as part of their identity, some people don't. So it kind of depends on the person who's talking about it. But I can see, and it's perfectly valid, like if somebody didn't really identify as monogamous, but then tried to like went and tried polyamory, and was kind of feeling like they were polyamorous, but then felt like they were going back to it. So I can understand, like, I want to verbalize that, because I do think that is how people think of it. But I want people to not think of it as anything that's shameful, or anything that is something that they ought to, that they ought to feel bad about. But I also, like, equally want to encourage them to, because I think it would benefit all monogamous people and anyone in any kind of relationship, to question the idea of safety in all aspects. Like, just because you're just because you get married doesn't mean it's safe. Like, not because I want them to be anxious all the time or to freak out about their partner leaving them all the time, but because I actually think that if you don't feel that this is safe, then you don't take it for granted either.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's really important. So
that's
yeah,
a
like,
great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Thank you. Yeah. So I think what I hear you saying is it's less about going back to something and more about shifting or transforming, or,
Yeah.
sort of you kind of moving within the field of different relationship dynamics and structures.
Yeah. And I think, it's kind of, I equate, when you use different language, like, I want people to be understand what I mean by that. And I think sometimes, like, if people are not used to polyamory, or it's like a new thing for them, or the community's new, or even the concept, like, for some people, polyamory is their first introduction to questioning anything sexuality and gender wise. Like, that's the first time they've ever thought about it. So I kind of liken it to, whenever I talk about like trans stuff, there are older trans people who still use outdated language, right? Because that's how they understand. Or when I'm talking to somebody who really, it's their first time even beginning to grasp what this is, I might use a language that I think that they'll understand, to make things go a little bit easier. But definitely, like, I don't think it's much more nuanced than that, of course. But I think, like, as long as there's no shame, like, that's for me the biggest thing.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for going down that rabbit hole with me.
So throughout the book, you offer those hands-on exercises, which I love, to help readers process, like we were talking about, and then take it even further with the journal. Could you share one from the Anxious Person's Guide that's particularly useful for dealing with jealousy or insecurity? Because that's the top issue that a lot of people struggle with, right?
Yeah. The exercise that I think is super helpful, especially when it comes to, like, dealing with emotions, like with jealousy, it's a tricky one, because I do think that another sort of thing you can pick up in polyamory communities is the idea that, like, okay, jealousy is always bad. Every negative feeling you have is secretly jealousy hiding behind a corner waiting to snatch you away. And I think that that's not always the case. And also, jealousy is sometimes very warranted, and is a sign that you need to pay attention to things. So I would encourage people to almost befriend jealousy, or at least not make it into this kind of like evil monster that is terrible if they have it, and a sign of terrible things. But I think that one of the things that I encourage people to do is like a check-in and check-up. And that is because I feel like in monogamy, like you generally, unless you do practice kind of more active relationship management, because I do think like if you look at the things that the Gottman Institute recommends, right, like there are a lot of things that they recommend that I don't think, I think are good for all relationships. But I think that a lot of people will only really have had the experience of a formal check-in or a kind of general check-in when something's going wrong, right? Like it's that sort of thing of we need to talk. And then you kind of experience a lot of feelings and you're like, oh my God, we need to talk. And I think that a lot of people do things when they're opening up in polyamory to make up for not having a check-in that they don't realize is that one of the biggest things that I've noticed is like the permission rule, the like, even though you've already said yes we're when we're polyamorous, we're non-monogamous, but they make a rule of like you have to ask me permission before you sleep with somebody else. And I totally understand why.
That was my outside voice. I'm sorry. Yeah.
But I totally understand why. It's that idea of a check-in, and it's that idea of like paying attention to your partner's feelings, making sure they're okay, but it doesn't need to happen like right before, like I encourage people to really like think about like, okay, not everyone's necessarily in this situation, but if your partner's like at a party, it's 2 a.m., you know, you've been at work all day, it's a Friday and it's been a really hard day. Do you really want to call at 2 a.m. from your partner going like, hey, can I sleep with this person? No, you don't. You really don't. And how does it help? How does it change anything? And really, I think that it's designed to try and create a sensitive and understanding partner. It's kind of like having a rule in a monogamous relationship that says you have to buy me a present on my birthday. Like you don't want to have, like, yeah, you'd love a present on your birthday. Of course you would. And obviously, like if you have a partner that's sensitive and caring and, unless you really hated presents for whatever reason, you would want that, but you can't create that by forcing it. And I think that what people generally need is check-ins and checkups. I think that if you have this sort of regular dialogue where you talk about each other's feelings, you don't necessarily have to solve them. It's not about fixing it. And if you actually are talking through things, then maybe the times when you do feel jealousy where it's warranted, like as an example, like let's say you've always wanted your partner to go fishing with you and they've been like, and then they take another partner out fishing. You're going to be jealous. Like, and that's not bad. But if you have these kind of regular things where you're actually saying like, hey, I would really like to do this activity with you because it means a lot to me. Can we, then I think that can solve a lot of that. But yeah, I think it makes things a little less scary. Whenever you do have to have a talk, if you have to bring something up, like if you have a regular check-in, I think the Multiamory podcast has like a radar method that is also really good. Like if you, it doesn't matter what kind of structure, but if you make it a habit to check in, then you don't have to have rules like permission. Then you don't have, and then also check-ins don't only happen when you might be experiencing some duress, which is also really hard to be the person who is experiencing that. You're like, my partner usually doesn't check in on me, but now they're checking in on me. Am I feeling duress? Like it's confusing as hell.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's a big thing I would definitely recommend. I'm not saying it'll prevent jealousy, but I think that, if you have a regular habit of communicating in that way, then it becomes easier over time as well to be able to bring things up.
Yeah, I find that when I have those regular check-ins too, knowing that it's coming helps me not be as reactive in the moment. I'm able to be like, oh, well, we can talk about that on Saturday or whatever day the check-in is, right? Like I don't have to go through the process of having a reaction, having the story, just interrupting the story, managing my emotions and all of that beforehand. I can just say, it's okay. We're going to talk about it. And then the actual nervous system doesn't come up usually.
Yeah.
In those days that
Giving
I'm
yourself
waiting
time.
to talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
By Saturday, my nervous system is much calmer and I'm able to be present and have that hard conversation or vulnerable conversation. It might not even be hard. might just be vulnerable, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I want to go, Lola, you gave a great example there, a great situation that comes up often in the work that we
Hmm.
do, which is it's 2 a.m. You know, you've got this understanding that you're going to check in with your partner before you have sex with anybody else. But, you
Yeah.
know, do you really want to get that phone call? Do you really want to make that phone call right when things are getting hot and heavy? Right. And so
Exactly.
one of the things that comes up for me is, and we talk a lot about this in the work that we do, is as part of the check-in process is making agreements, right?
Hmm.
You know, I'm not a fan of rules. I hate rules.
Hmm.
It's one of the reasons I identify as polyamorous is because fuck rules. I don't like them.
Hmm.
I think there's a place for them in this in society, but I don't think there's
Hmm.
any place for them in relationships. So I think for me, agreements work better. And so the agreement would
Hmm.
be, hey, if you know, if whenever possible, can you just check in with me before you do X, Y, or Z? Right?
Hmm.
And that would be an agreement, right? And that way, if it's
Absolutely.
not possible, then, you know, the next day, that person says, hey, this happened last night. I'm telling you the first possibility that I can, or the first
Hmm.
opportunity that I can. And so, do you need anything from me to help process this information? Right. And so you're
Yeah.
not asking for permission, right? And that's another
Hmm.
big thing that
Exactly.
we do in our work is stop asking for permission. You don't
Yeah.
need to ask for permission. If you want to do the thing, but do the thing in a
Hmm.
responsible, ethical way. Do the thing in
Hmm.
a compassionate way, right? And say,
Hmm.
I really want to do this thing. What do you
Hmm.
need from me in order to help manage any feelings that might be coming up for you? You know, that kind of thing,
Hmm.
right? And those are parts of the
Exactly.
agreements and the check-in, right? You know, hey, you
Hmm.
did that thing last week and it made me feel this way. I didn't know I was
Hmm.
going to feel that way until you did the thing. So now can we
Hmm.
talk about the thing so I can talk about how I feel about it and we can move through it?
It
What?
made you feel?
Yeah, did I say that? Did I
Yeah.
say it made me feel?
Oh.
Oh, bad Greg, bad Greg, bad Greg.
But I also think like agreements really helps too, because I always encourage people to think, okay, you want to set up a rule. Is this rule going to prevent the thing that you think it will prevent? Will it really, really do that? Like when we make rules about sexual health, because that's a thing where we make definite rules about, and we can say that because germ theory is a little bit easier than emotions and emotional
Mhm.
management. But sometimes when you create a rule, you actually make things a much bigger deal than they need to be.
Mhm.
You actually sometimes create the very problem that you're trying to prevent.
Mm.
And like
That's a good point.
I've had situations like that where I had a partner once promise me like I'm going to visit this person and I'm not going to sleep with them. And I was like, I don't care if you sleep with like I really don't care. And they're like, but I'm not going to. I'm like, oh, okay, like that's fine. And then they ended up doing it. And then I actually had feelings because I was like, well, you've promised something and then you went back on your promise. So like the creation of putting it on and making it a big deal made it more of a problem than if it hadn't have been a
Hmm.
big deal. So and I've had things like that where I had a partner, like we were still building our foundations of trust. I have a very big thing about like, because I said I'm introverted, I don't do a lot of parties, I don't go out like, and I always tend to date people who do that. So I always tend to feel like I'm not just fun, I'm a wet blanket, I'm not a cool partner, I'm not the fun partner. So we had an agreement, like if they were spending the night away, they would give me a good night call. But it was an agreement, like you said, like it wasn't a rule, it wasn't a hard and fast, you have to do this. If they had time, they could do this. And over time, I needed that less and less. Like I was bothered less
Right.
and less. So like I definitely like I'm not totally against rules, but I want people to really think about, is this going to prevent the thing you're going to prevent? Is this
Mhm.
enabling? Is this making the problem worse? Are you creating a problem where there doesn't need to be a problem? Because
Hmm.
sometimes I think you do.
I think for me one of the biggest differences between rules and agreements are rules like you mentioned are meant to restrict behaviors, right?
Exactly.
Rules are often not something that both parties or all parties in an agreement on. They
Mm,
often feel
mm,
coerced or they often feel manipulated into them. Whereas agreements are something that everybody can take responsibility for, right?
mm,
So if I'm agreeing to do this, if I'm agreeing to give you that good night call and I
mm,
don't do that, then I'm responsible for that, right?
mm,
Whereas
Mhm.
with a rule, if you're saying you have to give me a good night call,
mm,
then you're taking that responsibility out of my hands and you're making an obligation, right? And for me, that's a fundamental difference in the way that we relate. One feels very like very restrictive to me. Like I have a visceral reaction to it. And then the other one feels like, oh, okay, so this is something that I've agreed to do, which means now it's something I'm willingly doing because it matters. And the reason why, your anchor reason, as referring to earlier, is maybe because it's important to my partner. Maybe it's not that all that important to me, but it's important enough to my partner that I've agreed to it. So therefore, I'm going to follow through with it.
And then
Right?
you take ownership as well of your own
Exactly.
choices.
That's right.
Instead
And
of
you
it
don't
being
throw,
like, well, my
Absolutely.
partner said I can't do
yeah,
this, which I
fuck,
hate.
yes. Don't throw, and I literally say, do not throw your partners under the bus ever, ever. Take responsibility for it. If it's something that you have an agreement in place about, please, please, please just say it's not something I'm comfortable doing. You don't
Yeah.
have to tell them why. You don't have to get into a reason. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter. Just say it's not something that I'm willing to do at this time. It's not something I'm comfortable doing. Use
Mhm.
nebulous language, but don't say my partner won't let me do it.
Yeah. Oh, I hate that too.
Sorry. Strong feelings
Okay.
about that one.
So we need to wrap up. Tell us where we can find your books and your column and your podcast, whatever you've got going on.
Cool. So you can find everything at non-monogamyhelp.com. That's where I have all of the columns in the podcast and also like have my books listed there too. I'm also looking at developing and releasing because I'm very much not a person who like I don't want to be I don't like to say that I'm a guru or an expert because I feel like we're all kind of just stumbling around in this and I think but as I've given advice, like it's been like 8 years since I started the column in the podcast, I've noticed that when people are opening up, like I said, they always get told, read the books, wait 6 months. And I think that there are really a lot of practical things that people can do. Like, I'm not saying don't read again, but like there are practical things that people can put in place. So I'm actually putting together a course for people who are interested in opening, like things that they can actionably do right away. And lots of more exercises, lots more things like that. So that will also be on the website. And then I'm not really on X as much anymore because it's annoying, but it's on Non-monogamy Help. It's there occasionally. And then I'm also on Instagram and on TikTok at Non-mono Help. But yeah, you can find everything at non-monogamyhelp.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Have you tried Blue Sky yet?
I see it's hard because I'm like, oh God, I've got another social
one.
network. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I do.
yeah,
Another
totally.
one.
I do.
Totally.
I know exactly
it's
what
just
you mean.
getting out of hand. It's getting crazy, really. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So thank you so much for being here. This has been a real pleasure. I admire and respect your work, and I appreciate that you're putting it out into the world, and it means a lot. And I've certainly referred to it in my work. It's been helpful for me when reading the book, going through the workbook and stuff. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
That's
so
really
much for
lovely
being
to hear.
Yeah.
And remember,
Choose love.
and keep it kind.